right? And I'm like, of course not. It doesn't buy happiness, and there's more important things than that. And then I watch a Dr. Phil episode, and again, this is where people are going to judge me now. But the one thing he said was, that's bull. That money doesn't buy you happiness. It actually does. And I was intrigued because it was the first time I heard anyone actually say that. And he said, I'll explain. If you have money, you can buy a nice car, for example, and you get in that car and you feel happy, right? If you didn't have the money to buy that car, you wouldn't be happy, right? So he's like, indirectly, money does buy happiness.
Wake up, it's time to rise. Talking money with sharp insight. Jim and Ryan here to guide. Mastering the money ride. Saving stacks and planning dreams. Living large by honest means. Tune in now for the schemes. Breaking down financial themes. Money mindset every day.
Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Money Mindset Mastery podcast. I'm your host, Jim Leo, and joining me today is my good friend, my associate, and of course, my co-host, Ryan Janot. Ryan, how are you today?
I've got my flowered shirt on today because it's nice and bright and sunny, and it's now 18 degrees outside, 22 in the sun, so I'm excited about this, which makes me even more excited about our guest today, which we will just jump straight into. So go ahead.
Right. Well, joining us today is Hannah Horvath. Hannah, you are a certified financial planner, a finance journalist, and you also write a blog on the psychology behind money decisions, and based out of wonderful and beautiful New York. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
We're glad as well. And Hannah, you reached out to us about 4 weeks ago. I guess you had listened or watched one of our episodes, and a lot of what we talk about is money mindsets and psychology behind money, and this is something that you do as well. And Ryan and I are huge believers of when we put together financial plans for people, typically their plans, they're not successful, not because they invested in the wrong investment or the wrong type of registered product. It's usually because they make some bad money decisions, which is the underlying cause is psychological in nature. So we thought there'd be a really great fit to have you here today to join us in our session, our podcast session. But maybe you can tell the listeners and the viewers a little bit about yourself and kind of your journey on how you ended up where you are today in the finance world.
Yeah, so my background is actually in traditional journalism. I started out as a journalist, just freelancing, doing a couple of different odd end journalism jobs. And I actually just fell into doing financial journalism. And, over time, I got more interested in it because finance affects everyone's life. Everybody needs to kind of learn about personal finance. So it was helpful to me to learn about it, the stuff that I was writing about, being able to talk to experts and kind of hear their tips there. And over time, I realized so much of the financial advice that exists is focuses so much more on like the knowledge gap of financial literacy, when so much of it is a behavior gap, a lack of awareness of the underlying influences that drive that financial behavior. So I got my CFP about 5 years ago with the goal of just being able to understand these really complex financial issues a little bit better and just be able to give more actionable, accessible advice. And, part of that, kind of pushed me a little bit more into understanding the psychological side of money and why we make the decisions we do with our money. And today, a lot of my work is producing content around, like I was saying before, the psychology of money, kind of understanding the values and emotions we assign to money and how that in turn influences our behavior, and also, larger economic and social trends and how that actually can too influence our financial behavior as well.
And one of the things you write about is money scripts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever really heard that term before. So let's talk about money scripts. What are they? And potentially lead into how that impacts in terms of our money-making decisions.
Yeah. So the definition of money scripts is they are these beliefs and values and emotions that we have about money, and they were often formed at a very early age, typically in childhood. A lot of it is by observing the way your parents handled money, the way they talked about money, by the way your community, your peers, those around you, what you saw online, what kind of what the emotions and attitudes were around money there. And also, if you've been through any types of specific financial events, can inform your money script. And basically, these are unconscious beliefs that kind of operate below the surface, but they drive our financial decisions. And I kind of describe them as these like almost invisible forces that can lead to these seemingly irrational financial behaviors that everyone does. I mean, even myself, and there are probably plenty of times where you've done something and you've said, "Well, I know better. I have all the financial information. Why am I still making these financial mistakes?" And a lot of that has to do with your money scripts. And that's actually and it's a great reason why financial knowledge alone doesn't always lead to behavior change. You can give somebody all the information in the world, but if they don't have that awareness of what's driving their financial behavior, of their money scripts, it's going to be really hard for them to develop lasting financial habits that are sustainable for them.
So maybe to try to help people understand an example of a money script, I'm going to throw out some examples, but you tell me if I'm correct in saying that that would be a money script or not. So the first one I'm going to start off with is, 30 years ago when I started in the industry, I would sit down with some clients and they would say to me, "You need to speak with my dad or grandfather because they're stuffing literally all their money in a mattress." And we're telling them that they should invest it at the bank or put it in a bank account, and they would just refuse to. And the reason why, because I would ask the question, did they grow up or live through the Great Depression? Well, yes, absolutely. Well, that's the reason why they feel the comfort in keeping the money in their mattress, because we've read about the Great Depression. We didn't experience it, but they did. They understand what happened. So as a result of that experience, their habit or their money script was to hold on to their money, don't trust the banks, don't invest it because it might be taken away. And then what do you do? Would that be an example of a money script?
Definitely.
Okay.
And this is something that I've actually written about before, is even among generational, breakdowns, there is a lot of discrepancy between how those different age groups view and interact with money. I mean, you take someone who's falls into the Gen Z generation, they've almost never experienced any sort of recession or long market downturn, as opposed to maybe a millennial who graduated in 2008, had trouble finding a job. Their approach to risk tolerance, their approach to money and scarcity is going to be completely different. And that's a perfect example of a money script that can often develop. And it often develops kind of without you even realizing it.
And we have a question.
Well, I guess along that, often the script that I hear from a lot of people is like money is evil and money is dirty, things like that, and that ingrained behavior that is something that happened in childhood, often some sort of trauma that they experienced with other family members, but it's not their trauma; it's somebody else's trauma that is now kind of ingrained in their own kind of daily speech. Or, when I hear walking through the grocery store or retail, you hear, "Oh, well, we can't afford that," right? And that, by a parent saying that to their child, that itself is starting to ingrain that feeling of, not ever being able to afford something, versus kind of a universal, I guess, the belief of abundance, right? That there's enough money to go around. There's not a piece of pie and everybody gets everybody takes a slice and then the pie is gone. I think the script that I think what I'm hearing too is like, there's an abundance of pie. Everybody can take their piece. It's just a matter of how much you're going to take from that pie and what your beliefs are. Well, I'm just going to leave some for somebody else, or there's no pie for me, kind of thing, right? So, I don't know if there's anything else that you've heard, and again, I want this to be educational for people and to really reflect for themselves and their family members, what is coming to you generationally that you've kind of grew up believing, the behavior. What is something that you're maybe passing on to the next generation that
Hmm.
that may be a story that you want to be aware of, and no longer continue that pattern, right? And maybe change the language within the home. And again, whether there's examples that you have in your experience of the behavior and things that we can start doing, pushing forward for clients that are starting to identify these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can even be a singular experience, like a parent losing their job, you losing their job, or it could be kind of that grocery store example is a really great one, like a very sustained, almost subtle nod, saying like we can't afford this. Um, you know, it's pretty remarkable how the child can really pick up and internalize a lot of that messaging. And this is something that's been explored in psychology for a very long time, but I think only recently has been also applied to money. Like, oh, this is actually something that can really translate to financial behavior down the road because these experiences get encoded as emotional reactions to certain money situations. Other ones that I see as well. I mean, I think the whole scarcity mindset or building anxiety around money, I think, is a very common one. Also, if you think about too, seeing how either their parents or their peers like spent money, I think especially in today's society with a lot of pervasive money messages on social media, there is a tendency to equate, your net worth, your income with your self-worth. And I think, either that gets perpetuated by a member of like your peer, someone you look up to, what your family spent their money on, where like more of their money went, what they invested in. I think those are all things. And I also think too, financial literacy has been an issue for a long time. So I think if you were raised in a household where there was just a lack of knowledge on things like the stock market, that can create like a fear of the unknown and kind of create barriers to entry because you aren't comfortable in that sphere because that wasn't something that you were kind of taught about at a young age.
I think a lot of people, again, we learn from our friends, we learn from our family, from those experiences. And in many cases, they fail. The result isn't in their favor, right? Because they follow some of these trends. And you mentioned social media. I think that's one of the ones that Ryan and I hit on a lot because we're on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram, and we see the influencers and they'll drive around their Ferrari and whatever else. And then you kind of find out after the fact that they rented the Ferrari, they don't really own it. But the person who's looking at that social media video or picture is sitting there thinking, what am I doing wrong? Why don't I have a Ferrari? Why don't I have that beautiful house? Why am I not on a private jet? And then they might take certain risks as well. So do you think social media has kind of perverted our view of money and finances?
It's complicated. I think the simple answer is it's definitely changed it dramatically. Um, I think social media has democratized a lot of aspects of advice and information, especially financial advice and information. I think previously things that, you really would only be able to go to a financial advisor for is now more readily available online, which I think is a good thing. We have more information than ever before that you can kind of get by just doing a quick search. However, that doesn't mean all that information is going to be good or beneficial. I think we've seen a ton of misinformation, especially financial misinformation. I think, especially on social media, those algorithms reward certain types of content that isn't always the most beneficial. I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize when they consume financial advice online is that, you know, this influencer, if they're telling you that something works for everybody, they don't know you. They don't know your personal finance situation. Finance is very personal to you. What works for one person isn't going to work for somebody else. And so I think a lot of people go online looking for an answer, like just kind of like someone to be prescriptive and tell them, do this with your money and you're going to become rich. And unfortunately, that's not often the path that's going to be the most successful for most people. And the typically the best path to building wealth is slow and steady. It isn't that exciting and isn't probably going to get you a lot of views online because it's not super flashy. So um, it's kind of a mixed bag for me. I think with any type of information online, you have to be a little bit more discerning, which unfortunately, like I said before, it's a lot more exciting to post about like this Ferrari that you have versus, trying to say, well, it depends on your situation when you're giving someone financial advice online.
Can you repeat that? You said something about success is usually if you take that slow and steady approach. Is that kind
Yes.
of like factual? Okay, because I only say that because TVH is tortoise versus hare, right? That's our philosophy. It's taking the slow and steady approach. So you're never going to see Ryan taking a picture of a Ferrari or me doing the same thing because it just doesn't work, right? It's doing that good old fashioned, and sometimes old fashioned just works, right? But in terms of what's available now in technology and information, there's a lot of information out there. I think what people need to learn really is how to find the right information. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of cross border influencers, right? You being in the U.S., us being in Canada, and a lot of times Ryan and I will be sent a social media post or some form of article and says, "Hey, like, why aren't we doing this here?" Right? Why aren't you guys offering this solution? And then we'll look at it and we can quickly identify, well, that's from the US. There's different rules, they don't apply here, right? But there's a lot of misunderstanding from people, again, when they're looking at all this information and not realizing it's coming from a different country, different rules. The infinite banking strategy is one that keeps coming up here almost daily with Ryan and I, right? And it's a valid strategy in Canada, but life insurance policies work differently here than they do in the US. So works great in the US. It's okay here in Canada, right? But we're getting calls from clients saying, like, why aren't you recommending this? Well, it doesn't work the exact same way. That's a US strategy that works really well there. Right. So
Yeah.
I think that's something that people need to learn is how to find the information that is applicable to them.
Yeah. And that's why I always say social media is a good step to build awareness of topics that you might not have known about in the realm of personal finance. But if you're looking for a very specific answer about your specific situation, you are typically way better off consulting with a financial advisor that can take a look at your entire situation and give you that personalized advice. Because again, like I was saying before, the average influencer doesn't know their followers' finances inside and out. So they really are not equipped to give that personalized advice that a financial advisor can give. And I think another really big gap, slightly related to what we were talking about, is I think a lot of people, and why they turn to social media is they don't have that number. Wealth is very relative. If you are a millionaire hanging out around people that make $10 million, you are going to feel by comparison, less well off than they are. And so that's why I think it's very important to have that number in your head. Like, what am I really saving towards? What is that like tangible goal that I'm really reaching towards? And I think a lot of people actually struggle to come up with that number. I think they have this idea they want to build wealth, they want to kind of increase their income or what have you, increase their savings, but they don't have that clear definition of like, what does financial freedom look like to me? And it's different for everybody. And I think that having that in mind, I think will also prevent you from getting tripped up on certain, things on social media or getting tripped up on misinformation and kind of staying true to the goal that works for you.
This comes up often with clients too, is this conversation about, what is true to you, what are your values, and making sure you're kind of putting a blinder on to all the noise that's going out there. Because that's a great point, is like, what is your ultimate goal, right? What's your end goal in all of this? What's the end game, right, through all of this? And making sure that you're creating the right path for you, working with a team that is able to make sure that you're kind of keeping on track along the way, that you always keep in mind for yourself and your family members or close friends. What are your values? What are the things that you want to achieve for yourself? And making sure that we're not overspending in areas, that we're not getting sidetracked by a lot of the other things that are causing this kind of hesitation. And this, again, money and money creation is a habit, right? It's a behavior and a habit, and you have to create the right behaviors and then execute the right habits. And I think that's where a lot of people falter, or at least I believe that's where a lot of people falter, is this hesitation to create that habit. And I'm wondering if there's anything, tips or tricks that you have to help people start creating better habits for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, kind of circling back to what we were talking about earlier in this conversation, is bringing awareness to what is driving your financial behaviors. Is it anxiety? Is it shame? Is it pride? Just understanding those emotions, and also what makes you tick, what works for you. Because again, the best habits are ones that you can sustain over a long period of time. And it's kind of almost like going on a diet or trying to eat healthier. You don't want to restrict too much or do something that doesn't work for you, because you're not going to want to stick with it kind of over the long haul. So I think for me, so understand, bringing that awareness is like step one. I think step two is then designing your financial environment in a way that will make it as easy as possible to continue those habits. So a great example is like automating your savings. We're really reducing that decision fatigue. So you really don't need to think about these things. They're already on autopilot. Um, because from a psychological perspective, when you are forcing yourself to kind of exert and make a lot of decisions, your brain is just going to get more tired over time, and you're going to be less likely to do that thing. So just removing as many obstacles as you can, I think, is a great idea, one that I've even implemented in my own life. And I think continuing to refine that, because people change as we go on. You're gonna have different priorities. You're gonna have different things that you want to do with your money. Your values might change. So just kind of understanding that nothing is set in stone, and just showing up a little bit every day and forgiving yourself if you have a setback. We've all made a very silly impulse purchase before. That doesn't mean your whole financial plan is derailed. So just kind of trying to focus on kind of the wins and the positive changes that you've made, and using that as motivation to keep going.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the things that we promote with our behavioral cash flow program that we offer our clients is focus on the attainable wins, right? Short term, attainable. And it can't be something like, I'll pay off my credit card. It has to be something fun, right? Because similar to dieting, a lot of times diets fail because, again, like you said, they're very restrictive. But easier to kind of build that momentum if you've seen progress, you've seen an improvement. So, yes, I've lost 20 pounds, so it's worth me continuing on this path. I think with our money behavior, it's the same thing, right? You have to reward yourself. You have to feel good about what you're doing, because the burden of the bills, right? They're heavy, and we need to have that. Again, those little wins are very important.
We need to see results, right? Like if you're
Yeah,
working out or you're losing weight, you got to see the result, and the same goes for the money piece, right? The result is this reaching this small attainable goal, and then the longer is creating those habits and behaviors, right? So yeah.
yeah. And I'm going to share something, and people don't judge me for me saying this, but once upon a time, I used to always believe when people would say, well, money doesn't buy happiness, right? And I'm like, of course not. It doesn't buy happiness, and there's more important things than that. And then I watched a Dr. Phil episode. And again, this is where people are going to judge me now. But, the one thing he said was, that's bull. That money doesn't buy you happiness. It actually does. And I was intrigued because it was the first time I heard anyone actually say that. And he said, I'll explain. If you have money and you can buy a nice car, for example, and you get in that car and you feel happy, right? If you didn't have the money to buy that car, you wouldn't be happy, right? So he's like, indirectly, money does buy happiness. And I'm like, I don't really teach that to my clients, but I thought that was an interesting point of view, right? But talking about money scripts and children, because here's one of the things that Ryan and I believe in is educating our children and trying to educate them, not necessarily what the parents know, because the parents are also trying to figure things out, right? But actually have proper programs. Because I know in our schooling system here in Canada, they're starting to introduce financial literacy in, I believe, is it elementary schools, Ryan? They're starting to do that, right? Because we grew up, again, learning from our parents, learning from experience, learning
Yeah.
from our friends, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. With the school system in the U.S., are they starting to introduce money literacy as well, as far as you know?
Yeah, I don't quote me, I think it's about 26 states It's implemented into the high school curriculum. But I do know that there is a big push to on like the younger level through like developmental programs. Also, there's been a bigger push for like workplace financial literacy programs. So that has been a big push as well.
Yeah. So I'm just curious on who's coming up with the curriculum and what is it they're teaching the children, right? Because I know in universities here, my daughter just started university 2 years ago. So when I went around and did some tours, they talked about how they have financial clubs and teach kids, the students about money. But all they really taught them was how to invest in the stock market, right? That's not really, that's teaching you a part of what you need to know, right? And teaching them about Bitcoin, like it's more investment related, not really about how money works. Here they were teaching them more about maximizing your RSP, which I believe a 401k is very similar. Pay down your mortgage as quickly as possible. Like these are things that I think we were taught, Ryan, when we were younger, because our parents went through a period in the early 80s and going back to money scripts where interest rates on a mortgage here in Canada was well over 22-24%, right? The stock markets were barely producing at a 7% average return, still a strong rate of return. Things like interest bearing investments were paying about 14%. So they paid down the mortgages as quickly as possible because they were paying down a 22% debt. But now they were teaching us that we needed to do the same thing. That was
Mm,
the best thing for us was pay down your mortgage as quickly as possible, maximize your registered savings accounts. And in hindsight, Ryan, like for our generation, that wasn't really the right move, right?
yeah,
So I'm just going back to I'm curious on what is it that the schools are going to teach the kids in terms of money.
yeah. I mean, I can't speak for what every curriculum is, but I do have a sense that it's something similar to what's being taught in Canada, where and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before with the knowledge gap, where it's facts based learning, where you're learning about what is compound interest, what are mutual funds, what's a 401k, and less on the actual behavioral drivers of those certain money decisions. I mean, and in America specifically, a lot of the education I know in some of these curricula is focused around student loans, providing all this information. However, there is a very, very clear literacy gap between students that are taking out sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans at age 17, 18, and then when they go to pay them 4 years down the line. I mean, we're seeing a very clear gap there. The question is, what is kind of the solve here? And I think a little bit of it is, in the home, helping to kind of reinforce that the knowledge that you're learning at school with it being modeled through like action, showing the kids like here's how we manage our money, having money conversations in front of your children, um you know creating kind of just like a space for them to explore some of these money topics in practice, and just modeling financial behaviors and habits. I think you know I think most people learn the best by, quote unquote doing. So I think being able to see that modeled for them or kind of are able to participate, at least in some of the family discussions, even if it's just as like an active listener. I think that's a really key way that kids can actually synthesize that information that they're learning in school and see it kind of practiced in real life. And I do agree that, so much of financial advice is also about the moment. Would as a CFP, would I recommend someone with a below 3% mortgage rate rush to pay down their mortgage if they had like other types of debt or anything? I wouldn't maybe argue that. But, and that's why I think, you getting the facts is important, but having a place where you can see it modeled out and like actually applied to what is actually makes sense for your situation is super important.
Yeah, it's amazing because our experience up here has been, I would say, the generation from what would you say, Ryan, like 38 and younger, typically don't work with people like Ryan and I
Mm-hmm.
because they're bombarded with do it yourself. You don't need an advisor. Put it in a robo platform, and then what happens is as they reach kind of like their mid 30s, they're now coming to us wanting the advice that they can't get from the robo platforms. The robo platforms, they are looking up information. It's more investment information, right? But in terms of strategizing, planning properly, they're lacking in that area. So a lot of times Ryan and I would ask them, like, why are you now searching to work with someone like us, right? And Ryan, I think every single time it's like we realize we're at a point where we need advice. We need someone to provide us with some form of advice, right?
We
Yeah,
need value add to our day to day instead of just this is where I put my money and that's it, right? Which is still kind of the same advice the banks have given for years, which is just give us your money, we'll figure it out as it goes, but with no longer term planning. There was something that you mentioned about modeling, and I want to make sure I'm on the right track too. I think the modeling too, with especially at home, is looking at like your spending as a parent or as an adult, and little eyes watching. Are you getting always rushing to get the brand new iPhone? Are you rushing to you turn over your car right away? Always needing kind of the newest, fanciest stuff. Meanwhile, what we're finding with the cash flow, and this is what the education system doesn't teach, which is, do you understand your cash flow? Do you understand the basics of what money is coming in and what money is going out? And you know, we're bombarded with, take out a loan, take out a larger mortgage, get another credit card. Don't worry about that. And people are getting more and more into financial debt, not realizing, and that modeling behavior, kids are watching that to always want the newest shoes, the newest, them too getting the new upgrade of the phone, things like that. So the modeling, I think, needs to be a conversation that goes back to the scripting that you believe you were taught as a child, that is passed on generationally,
Hmm.
to then link it into what are the values and what are the things that we want to really achieve as a family or as an individual longer term. And by doing the things that we're doing right now, are we going to push ourselves forward? And that's the dialogue that I know that I have with my son, that we could buy this thing if you wanted to, but is there something different that you would maybe perhaps want, that's going to be a little bit kind of that reward, what's the word, self-satisfactory, like immediate gratification, right? So, which is another huge topic I know, becomes gratification of having things immediately, in our
Yeah.
day-to-day life. So
Yeah. I mean, the way that we spend money is often a reflection of our values. So watching the way your parents spent money is understanding what was important to them. In my own family, my parents, um, you know, they were pretty strict about, not having the latest phone. We had flip phones forever, you know, didn't go shopping for new clothes so often. However, they were very invested on traveling with us, traveling with their kids. That's where they felt like investing their spending. That was very important to them. It was a reflection of their family values. And then we
family,
kind of
yeah.
inherited those values as well, my sisters and I. And that was just such a great, and they were very transparent about, this is how much we're spending on this trip. And I think that was a really good way for us to understand, like, this is what's important to them, and this is why. And I think that has helped inform a lot of kind of the way I spend my money today as well. So completely agree with you there, Ryan.
but I think the challenge too, though, is because if I think of my own family, meaning my wife and I and our two kids,
Hmm.
right? Like my wife's personality is total opposite to mine. So she's always been a saver, saver, saver. Squirrel it all because you just never know when you're going to need it. I've always been of the mindset of invest, 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 growth, and also enjoying some of it along the way because at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm going to be around tomorrow to enjoy any of it, right? And then so we're very different. So I've taught her in our marriage to maybe enjoy some of the money a little bit more. She's taught me to hold on to the money maybe a little bit more. And then when I see that translated to my kids, our daughter, she's definitely more like my wife, right? It's like she hoards cash in her wallet. But my son, he's definitely more like me. and his thought process is about, well, he likes to spend, and I'm teaching him on why he should maybe hold back on that a little bit. But he also thinks about investing in a different way than my daughter does, right? So even with that dynamic, I mean, Ryan, for you, it's a little bit easier in terms of it's you and your son. Although maybe some of that, I don't know what it's like with his mom, if she has a different point of view with money, and if that cancels itself out, I'm not sure, right? Hannah, for you, it sounds like your parents actually shared the same money values. So that was very easy or easier for them to kind of share that with their children. And then there's internally in my family where there are differences, right? And, and what is right or wrong? Like I think that's the difficult part. One of the issues that I have with social media and a lot of the influencers on what's out there is you'll hear someone basically say, this is the way, this is the right way, and this is for everybody. And I sit back and I'm like, no, like, again, to your point, it's very individualistic, right? So that might be great for one person, but that strategy may not necessarily be right for another person, right?
Hmm.
The big one right now that I'm seeing recently is about car buying, right? And there are different extremes, and some of them is leasing better than financing, is buying cash better than leasing and financing, and then you have the other extreme where it's just like, don't buy a car, buy a bicycle and get around that way, and this is what what your wealth is going to look like 30 years from now. Like, well, that's not really practical for everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of that influence and information out there.
Yeah, it's such a spectrum, right? I mean, on
Yeah.
one side you have someone that's in credit card debt because they're spending way too much, and then the other side you have like this extreme frugality that is um driven by, a real distorted money scripts. It's physically painful for them to spend. But in between that, it's a spectrum, right? And so kind of wherever you fall on the spectrum, as long as you're kind of in that healthy range, and it makes you feel good, you feel like you're trending towards your financial goals, that is all good in my book. And I do agree that it is a red flag when I see anybody saying this is the way that you should be spending, because it's as personal as you are. um, a great example is similar to the car buying, which I live in New York, so I would have chosen the bicycle. But is the renting versus buying argument, which is, has been this kind of age old. And I always find it very interesting when people kind of really beat down on one side or the other, because there's so much wrapped up in that decision. The same with buying a car. I mean, somebody who's renting could really, really like the flexibility that comes with renting. And that could mean more to them than, being able to build equity in a home. Or someone who, really wants to put down roots and wants to kind of have that security of a mortgage, of kind of like a more stable mortgage payment. Maybe that sense of security is more important to them than, renting. So there's just so many factors into a lot of these big financial decisions, and there's no one right way to respond. And that's why, it just all ties back to your psychology. Like, what is the most important to you? What are your values? And, once you kind of really can hone in on what your values are, you can then use money to kind of help you kind of live out your values, so to speak.
Yeah, one of the things we teach people too is about lost opportunity cost, right? So even with the discussion of renting over leasing, I've had people say, "Well, I've got cash in my account or my investment. I'm just going to buy cash or pay cash because I don't want to pay interest on the loan." And then we're like, "Whoa, let's run the analysis because you're now missing out on earning 5, 6, 7% on your money to save 3%." And then we look at the long term differences between the two and the impact of those various decisions. And a lot of people are like, I didn't realize that. Right? I never looked at it that way. So these are the things that, again, we're teaching people is to look at money in a very different way. And there isn't a one size fits all solution. And quite honestly, I think, Ryan, you and I kind of preach the Mr. Miyagi philosophy of balance. Right?
Yes,
It's all
very
about
much.
the balance.
Yes,
Love
very,
it.
very, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to make sure that people see all different scenarios that come up, because we work with so many clients that this is often like, hey, you may fit a little bit of what a somewhat similar of this one client, but also keep in mind, as Jim has said for a long time too, having use and control of your money, right? And by putting that large down payment down or to buy a house or a car, well, what happens if the roof goes? What happens if the engine goes? How does that affect your longer term goal? And again, it's our job to make sure that we're keeping a balance of making sure if something happens down the road that we're conservative about making sure that you're going to be okay. That we're taking, again, shot at the robo anything, which is like we're keeping all these things in mind for you because we care, right? We want you to succeed, and we want to make sure that everything is smooth and easy for people. Again, we're going to go through some rough times, but one of the things I wanted to ask a little bit is like, especially when it comes to breaking these patterns. I was listening to a podcast earlier. Yes, I listened to other podcasts besides our own, which is that feeling people have, and in particular feeling the link between the patterns people have and how feelings can get too involved in our decision making and too involved in our ability to make a decision. And again, I would say for yourself, Hannah, like, is there any tips or things that you've noticed in your writings that helped people really overcome this kind of that they're trying to get over or pattern that they're trying to break?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It involves a lot of the practices that are used in other types of therapy as well. So I know I touched on this earlier, but pay attention to any strong emotional reaction that is disproportionate to a situation. That's a key phrase there. So if you feel an intense wave of anxiety, shame, guilt, excitement, even about a financial decision, that could be a signal that there's some sort of unconscious behavior driving, or a money script driving that. And I always recommend just writing it down somewhere. I was really shocked when I first started kind of keeping a log of some of this, of just how much my emotions were involved in some of my financial habits, and even just some of the financial behaviors I was committing. Like at one point, because I had been struggling with financial anxiety on and off, and I noticed that I was checking my financial accounts like multiple times a day. And I didn't even really, it was just so on autopilot for me that I wasn't even really aware of it. Something I recommend is just notice that black and white thinking. A lot of these scripts tend to operate in absolutes, like I can never take on debt, or I can't afford this. And a lot of rational thought is a little bit more gray, right? There's some nuance there, there's some trade offs there. So just be aware of that. Be aware of anything that feels automatic or impulsive. If you are about to make a financial decision, ask yourself, just pause for like 5 seconds and just think, like, why? Why am I doing this? And if you're kind of unable to answer that question, that could be kind of another, flag there. But in terms of breaking some of this, so yeah, bringing that awareness, whether it's journaling, just writing down, the emotions, the habits that you kind of find yourself committing. And then, like I said, designing an environment that like is really working for you, that can help just like eliminate a lot of that automated behavior. I think a big habit that I would say, I don't want to say 100% of people, but like 90+% of people struggle with, is impulsive purchases. We've all done it before. And the most impactful change to kind of rewrite that type of habit is just pausing. If it's a smaller purchase, pause for 15 seconds and just say, do I need this? For bigger purchases, I personally, this just works for me. Anything over like $100, $150, I implement a 24-hour rule. Or even like a 12-hour rule, where like I'll even put like a reminder in my calendar at the end of the day, and I'll say, just revisit this, see if you actually still need this. And a lot of times I don't. I just, maybe I got a targeted ad that just looked really good, or I was reading about something and it just made me really want to get it. Actually, a great example is this morning I was looking at Aura rings, because I saw a bunch of videos of people wearing them, and I was so close to buying one. I was like, you know what, let me just give myself 24 hours. And it hasn't been 24 hours yet, but I can tell you right now, I'm probably not going to get one. So um, that's just a good example of just taking a little bit, having a little bit of space between the impulse and then the actual
Yeah.
action.
It's funny you're mentioning the 5 seconds because the podcast I was listening to is Simon Selnick and Mel Robbins.
Mm.
And Mel Robbins talks a lot about the 5 second, like the 5 second countdown to getting over like anxiety, and just breathe 5 seconds, make that decision. So it's very interesting. And it goes to like rewiring our brain, right? To be able to stop and rewire, because we often, you know, we do the easy thing, right? We buy the thing, and the best thing, you know, the pattern, as it's easy, just wake up and scroll through social media and stuff like that. It's the boring, it's the boring, tedious stuff that really is going to make a difference and move us forward, that we really struggle with, right? And you know, her 5 second one, another thing that she had mentioned was, you know, 5 seconds, count to five, take action on it, breathe, take action on whatever it is. And I think the thing that prevents a lot of people from making these decisions, or the patterns, is they just haven't developed that skill yet. And through developing that skill, that's why, you know, we have the coaching for ourselves. You know, we do the money mindset quiz to help people understand maybe about a little bit about what are the scripts that you're telling yourself, and who you are. And you know, Jim, you talked about you and Carol, and how you guys have two different styles. That's a communication thing, right? And for us, is how do we as advisors, and a great advisor will actually start teaching you how to develop that skill, because you won't get that otherwise, right? And just another reason to take our money mindset quiz, to find out where you're at currently. You know, talk to trained advisors, people that you feel are gonna be on your team when it becomes the hard decisions, and they're going to help develop the skills, so you have that wiring and rewiring, unwiring some of the stuff and straighten out the wiring. I don't know why we keep talking about wiring, or maybe I'm the only one talking about wiring. So, but yeah, it's some of those things of making sure that the boring, tedious stuff is hard, and if you don't feel like you have the skill yet, there's some great resources, great people. Surround yourself with those great teams like Jim, myself, and you, to make sure that we can help you move past this and create not only yourself, but perhaps your business, or even the next generation, your kids and grandkids, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
No, Ron, I didn't realize, but you're right. That the money mindset quiz, that does identify people's different money scripts. Never really looked at it that way, because until today I didn't know what a money script was. So Hannah, thank you very much for sharing that with us. But you know, Ryan and I have even just recently talked about how there's a lot of marriage counseling that happens, but a lot of the marriage counseling has to do with like living with each other and values and all that. But they don't really talk about money. And again, using Carol and myself as an example, we think about money differently. And originally it was a bit of a challenge for us, right? So I think completing the money mindset quiz as part of a marital course
marital
probably
bliss.
would be, yeah, would be a great idea. And, you know, and going back to Carol, the credit that I will give her, once upon a time before I was married to her, I would walk into a store, and if I saw something I wanted, I'd just buy it, right? Very, you know, impulse buy. And sometimes I'd feel guilty about it. Most of the time I felt good about it, right? And then being married to Carol, the one thing she taught me, you know, 23 years, is she's never ever said to me, no, you shouldn't buy that. She's never ever said that to me. But she would always ask me the question, do you really need that? Right? And then so now like I would think about it. I'm like, you know what? I will walk around with it around the store, and I'll hold on to it just in case somebody else takes it from me, right? But then I'll process in my mind, like, do I really need this? You know, do I have something else that's similar? How is this going to make things better for me, right? And now I would say that when I make or try to make an impulsive purchase, 9 times out of 10, I put that thing away, right? Because I will walk around the store and I will, in my mind, go through those questions and ask myself, do I really need this? So thanks
Jim,
to my wife, Carol, for
Jim,
that.
you just revealed a childhood trauma right there, which is you were a kid in the toy box, in the sandbox playing, and somebody took your toys. Now it's been ingrained in you to hold on to it as you walk through the store until you're done with it. So
Exactly.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
amazing.
So we've learned a lot today, Hannah. Are there any other points that we haven't touched on that you would like to touch on before we say goodbye to everyone?
I think the one thing I'll just say, and this is a very common misconception about money psychology, all of this, is that many people think that changing your money psychology or even just like changing your financial habits is all about positive thinking and willpower. And I think many people think that if they just try harder or have more discipline, they're going to automatically make better financial decisions. And if you take anything away from this conversation, you should realize that so much of our financial behavior is unconscious and really deeply rooted in our beliefs, and even like neurological patterns in our brains. And willpower alone cannot override these forces, at least not sustainably over a long period of time. So that's why bringing awareness is just so important to be able to kind of start that behavior change. And it's a lifetime journey, understanding our brains and why we make the decisions we do. But the more you kind of get curious with yourself and your brain, the better off you'll be in the long run.
Awesome.
I've really enjoyed watching and following you on your brain on money, because it's not overwhelming, and it's good information. It's solid information versus like actual research, actual like fact stuff. And again, it's bite size, which is what I always like when it comes to clients, is like, here, take a bite out of this, let this mull a little bit and understand. And again, everything we've talked about today about really the psychology and creating new habits and new behaviors, not only for yourself but your family, and as I say, business too. It's really important for people to give a like, follow, and then even check out your brain on money, and that's on Instagram, I know for sure, Facebook too.
Yeah, Instagram and Facebook, and then my newsletter is through Substack, but all my links are in my Instagram, so you can find me there.
Right. And your newsletter's at hannahhorvath.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're going to do is, as we post these, I'm going to put your website, because I think you have all the links there, your YouTube channel. They can sign up for your newsletter there as well, if they'd like to. I encourage people to do so, because you're not yelling at anyone. You're not telling anybody that they're wrong. You're providing information and leaving it up to the reader to basically decide, what's right and what's wrong for them. Right. So that's what we really appreciate about your newsletters and your social media content as well.
Thank you so much. I've had such a great time chatting with you guys, and I hope readers can get some knowledge out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ryan, should I ask you to share how people can get a hold of us? Or no? You always forget.
Instagram, tvhfinancial.ca, tvhgroup.ca. I don't know what the phone number is because I don't phone myself. So
647-727-4668. And you can email us financial@tvhgroup.ca. And once again, we're on also LinkedIn and YouTube and on any of the major podcast platforms as well. So, Hannah, once again, really appreciate your time today. I'm glad we were able to share some information with your viewers, our viewers and listeners, and really encourage everyone to just look up Your Brain on Money at hannahhorvath.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.
Why is it me? Why am I that guy? I still buy low, still sell high.